Hi everyone. So we've had the guidance that we've been waiting for published on the coronavirus job retention scheme. That was published late last night, and it answers some, not all, but most of the questions that many of us had about how the scheme operates. So is a lot of technical detail. I'm not going to cover all of it, but I am going to cover the main points that we know. So who can claim? So this scheme is aimed at businesses, charities, public authorities, and recruitment agencies. The scheme runs from the 1st of March for 3 months, so up to the end of May. It may be extended beyond that, but at the moment, that is the period in which you can reclaim. At the end of May, if the scheme doesn't continue to run or isn't extended further, then employers will have a decision to make about the staff they have furloughed, whether they're going to let them go or carry on paying themselves without further funding from the government. You have to have had a POA scheme set up on or before the end of February. You have to have a UK bank account, and the scheme is going to be based on the wages at the end of February for the majority of workers. So in terms of the workers or employees that can claim, so you've got full-time and part-time, they're fine. But you've also got employees that fall into the category of the flexible hours or the agency contracts or 0 hours. So they are still eligible for this scheme as well, which is important. If you've made anyone redundant since the 28th of February, so if you made anyone redundant in March, because of coronavirus issues, etc., then you can now go back and rehire them and furlough them. So anyone that's made decisions quickly before this guidance was announced, if you wish, you can take those employees back on and furlough them straight away, and that can be backdated to the 1st of March. So depending on how you operate the scheme, that might not even cost you any money in the long run. So the eligibility is basically that employees cannot undertake any work for you once they have been furloughed. That's really important. So they can't do any work. They can't do admin. They can't do an hour here, an hour there. No work can be done whatsoever, with the exception of required training that that they have to do as part of their job role. They can do that. That is the only exception. If an employee has more than one job, so he has a job with you and a job with somebody else, then it's treated separately. So they can receive subsidies for both jobs, and they can be furloughed for one and still have the other one in place at the same time as well. So the amount that you can claim is important. So previously, we weren't sure whether the £2,500 per month cap per employee would cover other wage costs as well. So it turns out that it will do. So for your full-time and your part-time staff, you can recover the lower of 80% of their regular wage as at the end of February. So it's based on what you put through the payroll in February, or £2,500 per month. So in that calculation or in that consideration, you have to ignore any fees, commission, bonuses, all elements like that of the pay are ignored, and it's based on the standard amount of pay. So that's fairly straightforward. For your guys who are on variable pay, so their pay fluctuates, is slightly trickier. If they've been employed for a full 12 months, then you can claim the higher of the same month's earnings from the previous year, i.e. if you're paying someone for March 2020, then you can look at March 19 pay, or the higher of the average monthly earnings for the 1920 tax year. If someone's been employed for less than a year, so they're only employed with you from within the 1920 tax year, then you just have to use an average of their monthly earnings since the date that they started. So on top of the money that you can get back, either the 80% or the 2,500 cap, whichever, you as a business can also claim for the employer's NI and the minimum auto-enrollment pension contributions that you would have made as well. So for an employee that's capping out at 2,500 a month, you're going to get more than that back, because you're going to get the employer's NI and the pension costs on top of that as well. So at the moment, there's no mechanism for actually processing this reclaim. HMRC have got to actually build out a system to cope with this. So you will still need to be running payroll and running this amount through through the payroll. Employers can choose to top up the 20% if they wish, but they don't have to. So they can choose to just run the 80%, or they can choose to top it up with the additional 20%. Either way, those wages that go through payroll, whether it's furloughed or the 20% on top, they are subject to the same income tax and national insurance rules. So that is the gross pay the employer is going to receive, and the employee will obviously have tax and NI deducted in the normal way. It's really important to note that obviously there's a large financial element to this, which we're talking about, but there's also a very strong legal and HR perspective, which we are not going to cover. So our advice is strongly seek the advice of a professional in that field to help you with this. There's all kinds of minefields that you can step into here around the employment contracts that you need to be careful of. Employers should be writing to their employees and confirming that they've been furloughed before they do this, and keeping a record of that. That's really important as well. So when we get to the stage of processing the claim further down the line, which, by the way, HMRC think to be by the end of April, they seem to be optimistic for that. So you're going to need a few bits of information. You're going to need your PAYE reference number, the amount of employees that are being furloughed and the period for, the amount that's been claimed, your bank details and your contact details. And essentially, you will submit that claim in. It can be backdated to the 1st of March if that's applicable. And HMRC are just going to make a payment directly into a UK bank account via bank transfer. So that's all pretty straightforward in terms of the claim perspective. The grant, this scheme is classed as a grant. So same conditions apply that I mentioned in the previous videos. The grant will be taxable. So if you're a limited company, you will pay corporation tax on the grant. You're going to have to declare that as income received, but they're non-refundable. So it's not something you have to pay back like you would do in a loan. So another important point to cover as well for the furloughing is that staff can be furloughed for a minimum of 3 weeks. So once they're furloughed, they can do no work whatsoever for 3 weeks. You can then recall them. So you can put them back on your payroll for 3 weeks if you wish, or longer. And then you can stick them back on furloughing again. So you can switch between them, but you can't be having an employee that's working one day and then not the next. But for example, one potential benefit to this may be where you have 2 separate teams that you want to be coming in on separate times. You can have them running a minimum of 3 week cycles, for example. That can work. When you submit the claim, you can do 1 claim for every 3 weeks. You can't claim for any less because that's the minimum length an employee can be furloughed for. So one notable exception in the guidance that I know a lot of you are really keen to hear about is how we treat directors. There's still no clear guidance on that, I'm afraid, and it's something we are, along with many others, still trying to seek how we should treat directors. At the moment, there's various other references in other pieces of government announcements that this scheme could apply to directors, but it's what directors that can apply to. So where there's multiple directors all in employment contracts and 2 or 3 of them say, for example, are going to do no work and one of them is just going to keep the company running, those 2 or 3 could be furloughed fairly easy, I would imagine. The difficulties come from where you have a sole director. By definition of the role of a director, it's virtually impossible to furlough yourself and say you do no work for the business whilst keeping the business open. So there's a very tricky HR legal technical perspective that needs clarification on, especially for sole directors. So no clarification on that yet, I'm afraid. As soon as we hear anything differently, we'll let you know. Hopefully this helps. We're bound to follow this up with further guidance, so keep an eye out and we'll let you know when we have any further information for you.